Hey, how's it going? Mike from LI Flies Mike. And recently I made a post asking some folks what sort of flies they would like to see tied here on the channel. So shout out to Gene here. He goes, "Hey Mike, I'd like to see your spin on Bill Murdich's Murdich Minnow striper version. Have tied and used successfully for smallmouth bass over the years, but would like to see your spin on it as a saltwater fly." Well, thank you, Gene. That's a great recommendation, and this is a very interesting fly that we haven't covered on the channel before. So as always, the full list of materials will be down in the description below, and today we're going to be using an Eagle Claw 254, but really any sort of streamer hook that has enough weight to the hook to help keel the fly will work. This is a buoyancy neutral fly, so it doesn't necessarily sink and it doesn't necessarily float. It kind of can suspend in the water column. So we're going to get started off with some bucktail here, and this fly is very simple. It only takes a handful of materials. I am going to be adding some saddle hackle here shortly, but we're just going to get started off with some bucktail, and ideally we want some pretty long bucktail here because this is going to cover a good amount of the length of the fly. And after pulling most of the shorter hairs out of the way and thinning it down to just the nice longer hairs that we want, but still having a good amount of bucktail, we're just going to tie this in right around by the hook point. So next, the fly calls for a very healthy amount of Krystal flash. There's the original fly's tail is pretty much made up of entirely bucktail and Krystal flash and Flashabou. So we're going to take a pretty healthy amount of Krystal flash here and tie this in. And then what we could do is, I decided to add some hackle because for striped bass flies in particular, I always love adding some thin hackle. So just taking some standard kind of quote-unquote flatwing hackle. These are just the sort of thin hackle patches that they sell at a lot of fly shops up in the Northeast here. They're not necessarily called flatwing hackle, and this is a half saddle I got at a local fly shop. But the idea is we just want some nice thin hackle, so you'll hear me call this kind of flatwing hackle quite often. And we're just going to take this and tie this in to where it's kind of tented. And this is my addition to the fly. I love adding hackle to striped bass flies, just in general. It's extra movement, and I figured it'd be a nice addition here. So next up, we're going to take a very healthy amount of Flashabou, and you want this to extend just past to where we tied the hackle or the Krystal flash. And what you want is you still want a pretty healthy amount sticking forward, because we're actually going to take this and fold this back here in a little bit. So you want about a couple inches sticking forward on this Flashabou, and you want to leave that forward section because we're going to fold it back. And then one of the reasons why this fly is neutrally buoyant, I believe, not only due to the weight of the hook shank and some of the materials we're using later, but we're taking a very healthy amount of EP fiber next. And we're going to be tying this in a bunch here. Now, you don't want this to stick too far back off the fly. The idea here, I believe, is that we're not only creating some body and section, we're kind of creating a wider profile, but we're adding some buoyancy with this EP fiber. Will naturally cause the fly to sink slower. But not only that, by adding this material here, we're creating essentially a wall or a cone of this material that as the water flows over it, it's going to flow around and create these little vortices, and then that's going to hit the flashy tail in the back and the hackle and cause that movement. It's a similar sort of thing that we see in flies like the kinky muddler that have a 3D profile and a larger head, and what that does is as the water hits the head, it flows back around and hits the tail and causes great action in it, which you'll see in the swim tank. But after tying our EP fiber on here, essentially just extending about a third of the way back on the fly, we're going to trim it so it's nice and flush, and then we can fold our Flashabou back and wrap on top of it like a high-low tie, for instance, either or. We're just going to wrap on top of it, securing it down. And then what we could do is we could take some super glue and coat our thread here. So now really the last major addition to the fly here in helping create this sort of head in the front is going to be taking some Grande Krystal Estaz here. Now if you were tying a smaller version, you could use the normal Estaz with like a 2-aught, let's say. If you were going down to an even smaller fly, you could use the smaller Estaz, the micro Estaz, for instance. But we're just going to take this, tie this in, and we're going to wrap it all the way forward towards the front of the hook eye. Now this in itself, the Krystal Estaz, will probably help add to the somewhat neutral buoyancy of the fly as well, because any sort of material, particularly certain synthetics like EP and even natural materials like bucktail that are hollow, adding material to the fly will change the way that it'll sink, right? So I'm sure the combination of the EP fibers and this Krystal Estaz kind of help create this sort of neutral buoyancy in this fly, if you will. And then after wrapping it to where we like it, we can just tie it down and cut it after securing it nice and strong with some good healthy thread wrap so it's not going to go anywhere. And then we can go and tie our little thread head, if you will, using very minimal amounts of thread, but just securing down the Estaz so it's not going to go anywhere. So last but not least, we're going to add some eyes here as the original fly calls for it. To be honest with you, you probably don't even need the eyes for striped bass in particular, but I really don't think eyes make a huge difference at times for the fish, but I think it makes a huge difference for us as anglers and whether or not we're confident in the fly. So that being said, I always love putting eyes on flies because me as a fly tyer, I think it kind of finishes the fly off nicely. But we're just going to take some 3D eyes here and some E6000. You've seen me do this a million times on different synthetic flies here on the channel. If you haven't, go check out. We have a ton of different fly tying tutorials and videos here. But we're just going to take a pretty healthy amount of E6000, put this on the back of the 3D eye, and then we can lay that eye onto the Estaz, and we can just kind of push it down and push it back a little bit. And this will just spread that E6000. It has very good adhesion with synthetic type materials. The other thing you could do is try and use UV resin, but UV resin with the Estaz can get really messy, and it can get caught on the Estaz and it'll harden up and get stiff. Super glue could work as well because super glue kind of melts the Estaz and creates a chemical reaction. But I think the E6000 is a good fit for this personally. You could always take liquid fusion and go on top of the eyes as well if you wanted to. But after it dried, it seemed like it was very well secured. And there we go. That's the Murdich Minnow. It's pretty simple fly, as you can tell. It's an extremely simple fly. It was designed originally, I believe, for striped bass, reading on Umpqua's page. But I think it was released apparently around the stock market collapse and around 9/11 in 2001. So apparently it didn't get a very fair launch is what they said, so they relaunched it. But it's a very interesting fly. I think I remember seeing this back in the day, but I've seen various flies like this tied throughout the years using Estaz and different materials. But I will say I like the addition of the EP fiber. I think that is kind of what helps cause the action in this fly. So it was a fun fly to tie for sure, and you'll see it looks great. It's going to look even better once we put it in the swim tank here. So again, the whole idea, this is a neutral buoyant fly, so it's not going to sink too fast, it's not going to float, but it'll kind of suspend. So you could always, depending on the hook weight, you may need to add lead wire. You may want to avoid adding lead wire like I did here due to the wire of the hook being more than heavy enough to keel the fly. So the idea is that this fly, instead of sinking on a pause, will kind of suspend. So apparently it's a fantastic fly for smallmouth and largemouth bass fishing. As you would imagine, if it suspends like that, then it's a very, it's akin to a lot of different jerk baits or little rapalas and yozuris I used to use back in the day. So we'll have to give it some testing this spring for striped bass, as I haven't actually fished this particular pattern before. But you can see once we put it in the tank, it really starts coming to life here. Once I adjust that pump up a little bit, now you can really start getting to see what this fly looks like in the water. Not only do we have a nice long flashy tail, with our addition of the thin saddle hackles in there tented, we get some really great movement. But you can see that Flashabou that was folded over that EP fiber as well is kind of pushed up and is creating some nice action, and as well as affecting the profile. So it's a very interesting addition by folding that flashback on top of the EP fiber. And again, as the water hits the head of the Estaz and then flows over that kind of veil of EP fiber, what's happening is you get these sort of vortices, or the water flowing, hitting the head, and then spinning back around, hitting the tail, and causing this sort of undulation of the tail, you know, this really great action in the material. I tied it on a 4-rod and all chartreuse. If I was fishing for striped bass, this is what I would use. As the late great Lefty Cray said, if it ain't chartreuse, it ain't no use. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Shout out to Gene for recommending, and it took me about, let's see, from the point that he commented to the point I got this video edited was less than 24 hours. So Again, if you guys ever have any suggestions of flies or videos that you want to see here on the channel, feel free to let me know in the comments or any posts, as I'm always looking for new suggestions. So thanks, Gene. Appreciate it. And thank you so much to everybody that supports the channel here, whether it be on Twitch or YouTube, either just by watching and liking the video. That really does mean a lot, and hyping the video with your free hype points you get every week, or becoming a member here on the channel. Well, with that being said, my name is Mike from LI Flies Mike. We have new fly tying and fly fishing videos coming out every week. We have live fly tying streams every Friday night, and we have early access for members. Well, thank you so much for watching, and as always, tight lines.